take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I really want to thank the witnesses for being here, especially since, given the sheer number of you that are under sanctions by various countries, the risk that you take in coming and exacerbating your relationships with those governments. So thank you. Traditionally, transnational repression involved a country targeting its own citizens living abroad. But increasingly what we're seeing is foreign interference by those governments that is aimed at damaging, broader efforts that are aimed at damaging the institutions, public debates, and governments of the countries that are hosting human rights defenders in order to increasingly make those environments just inhospitable for that kind of human rights action. So, Mr. Kolga, I just want to start with you. Can you just briefly comment on that intersection between transnational repression and foreign interference?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I mean, on the Russian side of things, I mean, this is nothing new. This has been going on for the past 100 years or so. Certainly after the Second World War, we saw Soviet Russia then target all critics of the regime then, and that was primarily those communities that were forced to flee, whether it's the Ukrainians, the Balts, the Poles, others. Anyone who was critical of Soviet Russia's colonial and neo-imperialist practices was often labeled as a fascist, as a neo-Nazi. So that means anyone, from those who fled, even children of those refugees, including myself. And using that term, what that was intended to do was to silence them, to discredit them, dehumanize them. And that's a tactic that's been just modernized over the past 20 years by the Russian government.
In the context of the Cold War, but we're less familiar with it in terms of China and the things that China is currently doing in that to sort of mimic some of those concepts that the Russians used to use in the context of Canada. And so I want to turn to Ms. Zumerte. You and three of you have personally, at least three of you, have personally been sanctioned by the Chinese government. When you hear claims that forced labor in China is merely hearsay, I'm wondering how this fits for you inside that framework of transnational repression and an attempt to make Canada less hospitable to human rights defenders of the practices that China is perpetrating. And I'm wondering how you respond to that based on your own experiences. And do you think that dismissing those concerns as hearsay really risks downplaying the credible evidence and discourages victims and witnesses and activists from being able to do the good work that they do?
Absolutely. I think that does downplay the severe abuses, and especially in a context where the Chinese government has consistently refused access to international experts, including UN experts. For the last UN Special Rapporteur who actually went and visited was in 2009, Frederick Novak, Special Rapporteur on Torture. Since then, no meaningful access was given, except for one Special Rapporteur last year on coercive unilateral measures, who basically said that sanctioning China was bad for the economy and for the development in China overall, which was actually, we criticized this a lot. But no meaningful access was given even to the UN Human Rights High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, in 2022. So it does downplay a lot.
And Mr. Thurchin, in the context of the threats that you faced, do you feel that the moves that we're making towards doing more business with China, in the context of the questions about electric vehicles that my colleague asked and some of the other activities that we're doing, do you think that that sends a signal to those regimes that their activities aimed at silencing voices around human rights are effective and that they should keep going? Like, what does this mean for you? And what does it mean for your personal safety?
Thank you. I think China has used trade into its advantages for a long time to coerce, anyone speaking on Tibetan and human rights issues. What we could learn a lesson from is the U.S. had very engaged, interlinked trade relationship with China for decades. And now China has turned it around into its advantage. So we have to be very careful. I'm not saying that we shouldn't diversify trade and engage with China. But when we do, we have to establish very strong guardrails, and we must understand that this is a regime which could be very ruthless. It has, a colleague spoke about United Front Work, but what we haven't spoken is China has an intelligence wing called MSS, which has 3 times as more people than CIA, and it uses this MSS to, surveil on people. So, am I in favor to, engage in trade with China? Not really, as a Tibetan Canadian, but I also understand Canada's need to diversify trade. So I would focus on establishing guardrails, which China would take it as really, I think, it's a step to challenge its coercion capability.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Kolga, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I would completely agree with that. I mean, we have to have an understanding that the Canadian government is trying to diversify trade, but at the same time, we should be also able to call out human rights abuses, and certainly to speak up for those 20 Canadians who have been placed on China's sanctions list. I didn't hear any mention of that when the Prime Minister was in Beijing, and I know that a lot of us were concerned that our situation was not at all mentioned during that trip.
Merci. Thank you, Madame Cloners.